Welcome to our peaceful corner of the internet, where stories are here to help you drift off to a place of rest and calm. Tonight we invite you to settle down, let go of the day's worries, and sink into a soothing bedtime story crafted just for you. Each word, each scene is carefully designed to help your mind unwind, your body relax, and your thoughts slow down. So, find a comfortable position, take a deep breath, and let the story gently guide you to a restful night's sleep. Close your eyes, listen closely, and let tonight's journey begin. The sun had just begun its ascent over the sleepy fishing village, casting a warm glow on the quiet beach. The only sounds were the rhythmic lapping of the waves and the occasional cry of a seagull. A lone fisherman was rowing his small boat toward the shore, the faint outline of his catch visible as he drew closer. His face was weathered by years of salt and sun, his movements slow yet efficient, as if he had performed this routine 1,000 times. On the shore, a businessman stood, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the sand. He was on vacation, though his mind remained wrapped in the bustle of the city, constant meetings, deadlines and responsibilities. He noticed the fisherman, whose worn clothes and gentle smile caught his attention. There was a serenity in the fisherman's expression that contrasted starkly with the businessman's restless demeanor. Curiosity piqued, he waited as the fisherman docked his boat. "Good morning," the businessman called, hoping to start a conversation. The fisherman nodded. "Good morning to you, sir." He began unloading his catch, several fish, modest in size but enough to make a decent meal. His movements were calm, as though he had all the time in the world. "Impressive catch you have there," the businessman remarked, observing the fisherman's relaxed pace. "Is this what you usually get?" The fisherman smiled. "Yes, it's just about right for me and my family. Enough to eat, some to sell. It's a good day." The businessman frowned slightly. "But what if you caught more? With a bigger catch, you could sell more, save money, maybe even expand. Why settle for just enough?" The fisherman looked at him with a gentle amusement. "And what would I do with more?" "Well, with more money, you could buy a larger boat, hire people to help, catch more fish, and sell even more. Eventually, you could have a whole fleet of boats. Imagine the income that would bring." The fisherman nodded thoughtfully but seemed unperturbed. "That does sound interesting. But then, what would I do after all that?" The businessman was prepared for this question. With more money and success, you could retire early, maybe even move to a nice place where you wouldn't have to work so hard. You'd have plenty of free time to do whatever you want, fish whenever you like, spend time with your family. Just relax. At this, the fisherman let out a hearty chuckle. "And what do you think I'm doing now, my friend?" he asked, spreading his arms wide, gesturing to the ocean and the serene beauty of the morning. "I already have everything I want. I fish when I feel like it. I spend time with my family, and I get to enjoy this view every day. Why would I go through all that trouble just to come back to what I already have?" The businessman was momentarily speechless. He had never considered life in such simple terms before. To him, success was a ladder. Each rung a step closer to a future he could never fully reach, because once he climbed it, there was always another rung waiting. The fisherman continued, "Life doesn't need to be complicated. Out here I have the ocean, my boat, and my family. There's peace in knowing what is enough." For the first time, the businessman felt a flicker of doubt in his own ambitions. He had spent years striving for more, assuming it would one day lead to happiness. Yet here was a man who had none of the things he coveted. No grand home, no flashy car, no vast sums of money, and yet seemed perfectly content. "Maybe you're right," he admitted quietly. He felt strangely humbled by this man, who owned so little but possessed something he himself had been searching for, a sense of fulfillment. The fisherman smiled kindly as if he understood. "Sometimes, it's not about having more. It's about knowing when you already have enough." With that, he hoisted his modest catch over his shoulder, gave a final nod to the businessman, and headed up the beach. As the fisherman walked away, the businessman remained by the shore, lost in thought. The waves lapped gently at his feet, each one seeming to whisper a truth he had been too busy to hear. That happiness might not be something he needed to chase, but something he could choose to find in the present moment. The fisherman had finished hauling his modest catch to shore, and as he packed up his gear, the businessman watched from a nearby bench, an inquisitive smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't often that he had the time to observe life in such an untouched setting, and he felt an urge to understand what drove the fisherman. Taking a breath, he approached, clearing his throat. "Mind if I ask you something?" the businessman began, adjusting his watch, his polished appearance contrasting starkly with the fisherman's worn clothes and relaxed posture. "Ask away," the fisherman replied with a nod, his face open and friendly. The businessman took a seat on the edge of the dock, his gaze shifting to the ocean before them. "I noticed you brought in a pretty small catch today. Aren't there more fish out there to be had?" The fisherman chuckled softly, a hint of bemusement in his eyes. "There are always more fish in the sea," he answered, his tone calm, "but these are enough for me." Curiosity piqued, the businessman leaned forward. "What do you mean, enough?" The fisherman wiped his hands on a rag, pausing thoughtfully. "Enough to feed my family and to sell a bit at the market. I get to spend my afternoons with my wife and kids, maybe fix a net or share a meal with friends. That's what I want out of each day." The businessman nodded slowly but couldn't help but ask, "But what about tomorrow? What if a big storm hits, or you get sick? Don't you worry about the future?" The fisherman tilted his head, his gaze on the ocean horizon. "I save a little, but life is about more than just preparing for a rainy day," he replied. "I find happiness in what I have right now. If a storm comes, I'll deal with it when it does." The businessman folded his arms, considering his words carefully. "That's where we're different. See, I believe that success means never having to worry. It means working hard now to make sure you're secure later. You could expand, make more money, save for emergencies, maybe even hire some helpers." "Expand?" The fisherman raised an eyebrow. "What would that bring me?" "Well," the businessman said, "think about it. You could buy a bigger boat, catch more fish, make even more money. Then you could build a whole fleet, hire people to run the boats. Eventually, you could set up an entire business and not have to work at all." The fisherman chuckled, shaking his head. "And then?" "Well," the businessman continued, warming up to his point, "then you could retire. You'd have all the time in the world to spend with your family, relax, and live peacefully." The fisherman's eyes twinkled with amusement. "So, you're saying I should work hard now, so that one day I can retire, spend time with my family, and live peacefully?" The businessman nodded, a bit thrown by the simplicity of the fisherman's statement. "Yes. I mean, doesn't that make sense?" The fisherman took a deep breath, gazing at the waves. "It does, but that's exactly what I already have," he replied, his voice gentle but resolute. "I spend my days fishing, and my afternoons are for my family, friends, and this beach. Why would I chase a future I'm already living?" The businessman was silent, staring at the fisherman with a mixture of admiration and puzzlement. This man's life, so modest and humble, had something that felt foreign yet desirable. "But doesn't ambition drive you?" he pressed, unable to let the conversation end. "Don't you want more?" The fisherman looked thoughtful, then shrugged. "Ambition isn't a bad thing, but it's not the only thing," he said softly. "I know men who are ambitious, who work hard every day, but they're always thinking about what's next, never enjoying what they have right now. It seems to me that they've spent so much time looking forward, they've forgotten how to live in the moment." The businessman felt a pang of recognition. "But without ambition, wouldn't life be stagnant?" he countered, grappling with the fisherman's worldview. "Where would we be if people weren't constantly striving for more?" The fisherman met his gaze steadily. "Maybe we'd be happier," he said simply. "I see ambition like salt in the ocean. A little bit adds flavor, brings out the best in the fish. Too much though, and it can spoil the whole thing. Balance, my friend." The businessman sighed, looking out at the open water. His life had been built around goals, around the unshakable belief that contentment lay just over the next hill. Yet here he was, talking to a man who seemed to embody the peace he'd been chasing. "What if I'm wrong?" the businessman murmured, more to himself than to the fisherman.
The fisherman placed a hand on his shoulder. "No one's wrong, friend. Life is different for each of us. For some, ambition is the fire that keeps them alive. For others, it's the quiet moments that bring joy." He grinned, a twinkle of mischief in his eye. "If you want my advice, go out there, make all the money you want, and when you're ready to rest, come back here. The ocean will still be waiting for you." The businessman laughed, nodding. "Maybe I will." And for the first time, he found himself wondering if perhaps one day he truly would. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long, warm shadows over the beach, the businessman found himself drawn back to the fisherman's simple boat by the shore. He'd spent much of the day mulling over their earlier conversation, and an idea had taken root in his mind, one he couldn't shake. "Back again?" The fisherman greeted him with a relaxed smile as he adjusted his nets, preparing for an early morning fishing trip. The businessman nodded, leaning against a nearby rock. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said," he admitted, his voice earnest. "About happiness, simplicity, balance." He hesitated, his gaze steady but hopeful. "I think I have an idea, something that could benefit you if you're open to it." The fisherman tilted his head, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "Go on." "I'm a businessman," he began, gesturing to himself as if that should explain everything. "I've spent my career helping people expand their businesses, make more money, grow into something larger." He paused, his face lighting up with enthusiasm. "With your fishing skills and my experience, I could help you make this little venture of yours much more profitable." The fisherman listened, nodding slowly, his expression unreadable. "Imagine it," the businessman continued, his voice filling with excitement. "We could start by upgrading your boat, making it larger and more durable so you can catch more fish each trip. Then we hire a couple of men to help you. With more people on the team, you'll bring in a much bigger haul every day." The fisherman's eyes flickered with amusement, though he said nothing. "Then," the businessman went on, "we'd expand further, buy more boats, train more fishermen, and establish a small fleet right here. We could even sell directly to bigger markets and get a premium price for fresh fish. You'd be bringing in more than you could ever imagine, all while others do the heavy lifting." The fisherman chuckled, shaking his head. "And where would I be in this grand plan of yours?" "That's the best part," the businessman said, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "Once everything's running smoothly, you'd barely need to work at all. You'd be the boss, managing the business instead of going out every day. Think of it. You'd have the freedom to enjoy life on your own terms, with financial security for your family, and no worry about a bad season or a storm. You could even retire early." The fisherman nodded, taking in the businessman's words with surprising calmness. After a thoughtful pause, he asked, "So, I'd make a lot of money, build a big business, hire people, and eventually retire?" "Exactly." The businessman's eyes gleamed. "Imagine it. You'd have enough money to never have to work another day in your life." The fisherman sighed, his gaze drifting out to the waves gently lapping against the shore. "But tell me this," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "After all that, the big boats, the fleet, the people, what would I do then?" The businessman blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Well, anything you wanted. Travel the world, explore new places, spend time with your family, relax, go fishing whenever you feel like it." The fisherman laughed, a warm, hearty sound that seemed to catch the businessman off guard. "But that's what I do now," he replied. "I spend my days with my family, enjoy every sunset on this beach, and fish whenever I like. Why would I go through all that trouble for something I already have?" The businessman struggled to find an answer. But with all that money, you wouldn't have to worry about a bad catch, or an illness, or unexpected expenses. The fisherman nodded thoughtfully. That's true, he acknowledged. But money isn't the only thing that brings security. My family knows that even in hard times we have each other. We don't need much to be happy, and even on the hardest days, the ocean still feeds us. But wouldn't you want more for them? The businessman asked, almost pleadingly. Wouldn't you want to leave them something they could build on? The fisherman smiled kindly, placing a hand on the businessman's shoulder. I understand what you're offering, my friend, and I appreciate it. But you see, not every life needs to grow bigger to find meaning. For some, happiness is found in keeping things just as they are. The businessman's shoulders slumped, his enthusiasm fading as he processed the fisherman's words. He had spent his life chasing growth, expansion, and wealth, convinced that these were the only paths to happiness and security. Yet here was a man who found all of those things within the rhythm of his modest daily life.
Still, the fisherman continued gently, I see that your heart is in the right place. You've offered me a gift, and that is something to be grateful for. He patted the businessman on the back, smiling warmly. And if you ever need to escape your busy life, you're always welcome here, where the ocean is calm and the fish are plentiful. The businessman managed a smile, though it was tinged with self-reflection. I may just take you up on that, he replied softly, gazing out at the horizon. For a long time they stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the water. As the evening deepened, the businessman realized that, for the first time in a long time, he was truly at peace. Perhaps there was wisdom in the fisherman's simple life, wisdom he had overlooked in his relentless pursuit of success. He knew he'd return to his life of meetings, deadlines, and expansion plans soon enough, but a part of him would carry the fisherman's words, a quiet voice reminding him to savor the moments that mattered most. Before he left, the fisherman gifted him a small shell, polished and worn by the ocean, a simple reminder of the place he'd come to appreciate. As the businessman pocketed the shell, he felt a newfound sense of clarity and gratitude.
The fisherman stood in silence as the businessman's proposal lingered in the air. His gaze drifted across the horizon, where the sea stretched endlessly before him, calm and familiar. Here, with the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore and the smell of salt and seaweed on the breeze, he found his peace, his rhythm. Every day, he rose with the sun, fished only what he needed, and returned to his family with the spoils of his work. But the businessman's words had cast a stone into that calm pool, rippling through the simplicity he treasured. The businessman watched him carefully, sensing the fisherman's indecision. I understand this would be a big change, he said gently. But think about the potential, about what you could achieve. You'd be able to provide a better future for your family, create opportunities for others, and secure your legacy. The fisherman nodded slowly. He could understand the allure of such promises. His family had never known wealth, and there were times when they scraped by. But there was a beauty in that too, a closeness and simplicity that bound them together. Would this grand expansion truly be worth it if it took him away from that? His brows furrowed as he thought of the long hours, the endless tasks he would need to manage, and the pressure that would inevitably follow. Running a business, especially one that size, is no small feat, he said finally, his voice low. I wouldn't just be fishing anymore. I'd be managing people, overseeing operations, maybe even leaving my family for months to make things work. He took a deep breath, weighing his words. Fishing. It's more than a job to me. It's what I know. It's who I am. My father did it, and his father before him. I'm a fisherman, not a businessman. The businessman nodded, listening carefully. And you don't have to give that up entirely, he said, leaning in as if to bridge the gap between them. You'd still have control, and you'd be able to shape this venture in a way that feels true to you. Plus, you'd have people to help with the day-to-day tasks. Imagine teaching other fishermen your craft, passing on your knowledge. You could create something lasting. The fisherman's gaze drifted out to sea, his mind filled with visions of bustling docks, rows of boats, and strangers walking in and out of his life, all pieces of a larger machine he couldn't quite picture. He thought about his family and what it would mean to them. More money would certainly help. There were medical bills, home repairs, and maybe even dreams they'd never allowed themselves to speak aloud. But would it truly bring them happiness? He cleared his throat. Money is a powerful thing, yes, but it can also take away as much as it gives. I'd be sacrificing my days here, trading in the quiet life for something I don't fully understand. The businessman gave a small, knowing smile. I won't deny it's a risk, he conceded. There will be challenges, no question, but with every risk comes the potential for reward. And I can see the potential in you and this place. With some effort, this could be something incredible. The fisherman sighed, rubbing his hands together as he turned the idea over in his mind, struggling to balance the scales. Could he give up the freedom he so cherished for a dream of something greater? His world, small as it was, gave him peace. His days were spent with his family, his evenings filled with laughter and stories, his nights filled with rest. He could not imagine trading that in for a world of deadlines, payrolls, and profit margins. He remembered his own father's words, "A fisherman's life is hard, but it's honest. The sea gives and takes, but it doesn't judge, and it doesn't demand more than you can give." It was a lesson he had carried with him his whole life, one that reminded him of the value of humility and the blessings of simplicity. But still, the businessman's offer tugged at him. What if this was his chance to change things for the better? What if he could give his family a life free from worry, a legacy of security and opportunity that stretched beyond the small comforts he could currently provide? He wrestled with these questions as the waves rolled in and out, mirroring the ebb and flow of his doubts. Finally he spoke, his voice tinged with both conviction and uncertainty. "I appreciate what you're offering truly, and I can see the good it might bring. But there's more to life than just chasing after more. I have what I need here, and it's enough." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't want to risk losing what I already have. The peace, the family, the life that keeps me grounded." The businessman nodded, understanding the fisherman's hesitation, but he saw something else too, a flicker of possibility that had been ignited, even if faintly. "And I respect that," he said, reaching out to shake the fisherman's hand. "But if you ever change your mind, know that the offer still stands. Sometimes an opportunity can be just as powerful when you hold it in reserve." The fisherman met his gaze, a small, grateful smile playing on his lips. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady. "Maybe someday I'll find myself ready, but for now, I think I'll stay just where I am." They shook hands, sealing a quiet understanding between them. As the businessman walked away, he cast one last look at the fisherman, sitting alone by his boat, content in his world. There was a wisdom there that he couldn't quite grasp, but he respected it. As for the fisherman, he watched the businessman depart, feeling a renewed appreciation for his life. He was reminded that wealth didn't lie in money alone. His fortune was here, woven into each wave, each sunset, each simple moment shared with his loved ones. And as he cast his gaze back to the sea, he felt at peace, knowing he had made the right choice, at least for now. The businessman leaned against a tree on the shore, crossing his arms as he looked out at the fisherman's humble boat bobbing gently on the waves. He glanced over at the fisherman, who was packing up his few tools with an ease that suggested a practiced routine, a life settled into simplicity. Finally, the businessman cleared his throat and asked, "I have to know, how do you do it? Day after day, catching just enough, and then you're done? Aren't there days when you want more?" The fisherman looked up, mildly surprised at the question. He thought for a moment and shrugged. "I have what I need, and I have enough time to spend with my family and enjoy the day." Why would I need more? The businessman's eyebrows furrowed, and he let out a small, humorless laugh. It's just so foreign to me. I built my company from nothing. Spent years living in a cramped apartment, working 16-hour days, sacrificing weekends, birthdays, vacations, just to get where I am now. And even now, I'm still working to maintain it all. You don't get to relax when you're responsible for so many people, for so much. The fisherman's curiosity piqued. Why do you do it then? A wry smile crossed the businessman's face as he considered the question. I suppose at first it was survival. I didn't have a safety net or a family business to fall back on. It was just me, alone, trying to make something of myself. And over time, it became an obsession. Each success led to the next goal, the next mountain to climb. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. After a while, you realize it's not about needing more. It's about never feeling like you've done enough. The fisherman nodded thoughtfully, sensing the weight of the man's words. It sounds exhausting. It is. The businessman chuckled, though his voice held a trace of bitterness. But it's also rewarding. You reach a point where people know your name, respect you, look to you as a leader. There's a rush to it, a satisfaction. But then again, he trailed off, looking out to sea, the waves whispering in a language only they seem to know. Sometimes, I wonder if I missed something along the way. The fisherman tilted his head. Missed what? The businessman sighed, running a hand through his hair. Moments, I guess. My mother passed away while I was too busy to make it to her bedside. My brother's wedding, I had to skip it for a major deal. Birthdays, holidays, just simple days with nothing to do. It's like, in chasing everything, I left so much behind. The fisherman's gaze softened. He could see the weariness in the businessman's eyes, the hint of regret behind his polished appearance. But you made it, he said gently. All those sacrifices got you to where you are now. Isn't that worth something? Yes, it is. The businessman nodded, his face unreadable for a moment. But there's a price. And sometimes I don't even know why I paid it. I mean, what's it all for, really? Another deal, another success. When does it end? The fisherman thought about the question, sensing that it wasn't meant to be answered. He looked down at his hands, roughened and weathered by years of work, but hands that held on to only what he needed. I think I understand, he said after a moment. It sounds like you've built a lot, achieved a lot, but you're still looking for something you haven't found yet. The businessman looked at him, surprised by the simplicity of the fisherman's insight. Maybe, or maybe I just don't know how to stop. Have you ever tried? The fisherman asked gently. The businessman shook his head slowly. Stopping? No. Slowing down, maybe. But there's always something that needs doing, another opportunity that's too good to pass up. And if I stop, even for a moment, someone else will take my place. Is that what you're afraid of? The fisherman asked, not judgmentally, but with a genuine curiosity. The businessman hesitated, feeling an unusual vulnerability in the presence of this man who seemed so far removed from his world. I suppose so, but maybe it's more than that. I've spent so long pushing myself that I don't know who I am without it. The fisherman nodded, understanding something unspoken. You're afraid that without the work, there wouldn't be anything left. Yes. The words slipped out, almost a confession. I've been so focused on what I'm building that I'm afraid there's nothing beneath it, nothing to hold on to if it all goes away. The fisherman looked down, letting the silence settle between them before responding. There's more to life than just the things we build, my friend. Sometimes the things we hold closest are the things we don't even realize we're letting go of.
The businessman watched him closely, taking in the words. Here was a man who owned nothing more than his boat, his home, and his family's love. And yet he seemed more complete, more at peace than anyone he knew in his world of wealth and ambition. For the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt, an unsettling sense that maybe he had built a life on shifting sand, something that might not hold if the tides ever rose. "What would you do if you were me?" he asked, voice softer, almost vulnerable. The fisherman looked back out at the waves, considering his response carefully. "I'd start by asking myself why I need so much, and maybe, just maybe, I'd try to find what makes me feel whole without it." The businessman fell silent, feeling the weight of the fisherman's words resonate within him. For years, he'd been chasing a vision, a dream that seemed to hold all the answers. But perhaps, he realized now, that dream was a moving target, something he could never truly grasp. In that quiet moment by the shore, the businessman saw a glimpse of what he had been missing, a life not of endless ambition, but of balance, of connection, of knowing when to hold on and when to let go. It was a simple idea, yet profound, and one that would linger with him long after this meeting. The fisherman offered a small smile, nodding as if sensing the shift in his companion's thoughts. The businessman returned the smile, a subtle but powerful acknowledgement of the lesson shared between them.
The fisherman looked out over the ocean, his face softened by a calm smile. He turned to the businessman, his gaze gentle yet piercing, as though he could see straight to the heart of the man sitting beside him. "You know," he began quietly, "I wasn't always here living this life. I came from a city, not too different from yours." The businessman tilted his head, surprised. "Really? I thought this was all you'd ever known." The fisherman chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh no, I grew up with the same ideas as anyone. Work hard, make money, provide for your family. And for a while I was happy with that. My wife and I worked hard to build a life together. We lived modestly, but I thought if we worked just a little harder, earned a little more, we could have the things we dreamed of. That if I just kept at it, I could give her the life she deserved." The fisherman paused, letting his eyes wander across the water's surface, watching the sunlight dance on the gentle waves. "But life has a funny way of showing you what really matters. When my wife became pregnant, something shifted in me. Suddenly, it wasn't just about working harder. I didn't want to be the man who was always working, never home, never part of my family's life. I wanted to be there to see our child grow, to share the simple joys that I'd been rushing past. That was when I decided to come back to the village, to return to the sea that I'd grown up around." The businessman's expression softened. "So that's why you chose this life?" "Yes," the fisherman replied with a nod. "I chose it because I wanted to be present for my family. I knew I'd have less money, fewer things, but I'd have more of what mattered to me. Time. Time to share my life with those I love. Time to be a father. To teach my children how to fish. To be there when they needed me." His voice was calm, and yet the quiet conviction in his tone made the businessman sit up a little straighter. The fisherman continued, "And that's not to say I don't have my challenges. There are lean times. There are days when the fish don't bite, or when a storm sweeps through, and I wonder how I'll make it through the month. But I found that as long as I have my family, the rest doesn't matter as much. We support each other, and that's what keeps me going." The businessman shifted, glancing down at his hands, which were smooth and uncalloused, a stark contrast to the fisherman's weathered, sea-toughened skin. He felt a twinge of envy, a strange longing for the simplicity and meaning that seemed to ground the fisherman's life. "But don't you ever wish you had more?" he asked, hesitantly. The fisherman laughed softly, shaking his head. "More what? More money? A bigger boat? Maybe a better house?" He gestured around him, to the small but cozy-looking home nestled among the trees just beyond the shore, where his wife tended a garden and their children played by the beach. "I have all I need. I wake up each morning with my family close, a fresh ocean breeze, the sun on my face. I know each day that I'll be able to work with my hands, to live honestly and freely. What more could I ask for?" The businessman felt the weight of the fisherman's words sink in. He'd spent his entire life striving, reaching for something just out of reach, pushing through every challenge with the belief that it would lead to satisfaction. And yet, he'd never felt the contentment that radiated from this man who had so little by material standards, yet seemed rich beyond measure in other ways. "You mentioned peace," the businessman said thoughtfully. "What does that mean to you?" The fisherman smiled, his eyes sparkling. "Peace to me is the quiet in my heart. It's the ability to sit here by the shore, knowing I have everything I need, that I don't need to keep searching or striving. It's being able to go to sleep each night with my family nearby, knowing I'll wake up and spend the day with them again tomorrow. I'm not chasing anything. I'm not weighed down by what others think I should be doing. I live each day with purpose, and for me, that is peace." The businessman's shoulders relaxed, as though some invisible weight was lifted. For the first time, he considered that perhaps the contentment he sought wasn't something he could achieve by simply working harder or amassing more. Perhaps it was found in appreciating the life he had, in focusing on the relationships and experiences he'd taken for granted. As if reading his thoughts, the fisherman added gently, "I know not everyone can live like I do, but I do think we can all find our own peace wherever we are. Sometimes it's less about changing your whole life and more about changing the way you see it. If you're always looking forward, thinking about what's next, you miss what's right in front of you." The businessman looked out over the ocean, his heart filled with a newfound sense of understanding. He felt a strange calm settle within him, a whisper of peace he hadn't known he was missing. "I think I understand," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been looking for satisfaction in the wrong places." The fisherman smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's never too late to make a change. Life is like the sea, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but always offering something new. Just remember that true wealth isn't what you can accumulate, but what you can appreciate." The two men sat together in silence, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the water. And in that moment, the businessman felt that perhaps he'd just found something more valuable than any business deal, more lasting than any material success, a glimpse into what it truly meant to live a rich and meaningful life.
As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm golden glow across the water, the businessman and the fisherman found themselves laughing together, their voices mixing with the steady rhythm of the waves. Despite their differing views on life, they'd found common ground in the simple act of sharing stories. "So, you left the city for all this?" the businessman said, gesturing toward the stretch of beach, dotted with small boats and the fisherman's modest home in the background. "No regrets." The fisherman smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "Not a one. It's not that the city doesn't have its charm or that ambition is wrong, but I just realized that I wanted something different, something slower and closer to home." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "For me, success isn't about how much I have. It's about how much I enjoy what I do have." The businessman nodded, feeling a pang of recognition. He'd often thought that his life had passed by in a series of busy, overlapping moments, without any time to pause and savor what he'd accomplished. "I get it," he admitted, "but it's hard, isn't it, to resist the urge to keep going after more?" The fisherman's face softened and he nodded. "Sometimes it is. There are days when I wonder what it would be like to have more money, a bigger boat, or a more luxurious life. But then I look around me, at my family, my home, and the sea, and I feel a peace that reminds me why I chose this life." He glanced at the businessman, sensing an unspoken struggle. "What about you? Do you ever feel like it's all too much?" The businessman hesitated, then sighed, releasing a tension he hadn't known he'd been holding. "Yes, actually. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even happy. I've spent so many years climbing the ladder, and now that I'm at the top, I don't know if I like the view. I keep wondering if I should have made different choices." The fisherman's eyes softened. "It's never too late to make new choices. Maybe you don't have to change everything. Maybe it's about finding balance." They fell into a comfortable silence, both men gazing out at the sea, as if the waves held answers to life's questions. After a moment, the fisherman broke the silence. I had a friend once, back in the city. He was like you, a businessman. Always busy, always chasing the next thing. One day, he came here to visit. He'd never taken a break in his life, and when he saw how I lived, he didn't understand. He thought I was wasting my potential. The fisherman chuckled, shaking his head. But the funny thing is, he told me later that it was here in this village that he felt at peace for the first time. Intrigued, the businessman leaned in. So what happened to him? The fisherman's smile faded and he looked down at his hands. He went back to the city, kept working just as hard as before. But after a few years he collapsed. Heart attack. He survived, thank God. But he told me later that it changed him. He'd been given a second chance. Now he spends half the year traveling, seeing the world. He says he feels alive in a way he never did before. The businessman was silent, taking in the story. He thought about his own relentless schedule, the constant demands and late nights. Part of him envied the fisherman's freedom, the simplicity of his life. Do you think I could ever feel that kind of peace? The fisherman smiled gently. I think you already can, if you start looking for it in the right places. Peace isn't found in what you have or where you are. It's found in how you live. He gestured toward the setting sun, casting long shadows across the beach. It's here, in the quiet moments, in taking time to appreciate what you have. For a while, the two men sat in silence, watching as the waves washed in and out, each bringing its own rhythm, as steady as a heartbeat. Then the businessman spoke again, his voice low. You know, I think I'd like to come back here someday. Not just for a vacation, but maybe to spend a season, to see if I could live a bit more like you do. The fisherman grinned. You'd be welcome any time. There's always room for another friend here. He extended his hand, and the businessman shook it, feeling a sense of warmth and connection that went beyond words. As the sky deepened into shades of pink and orange, the fisherman looked out over the horizon, then back at the businessman. You know, he said thoughtfully, it's funny. We live such different lives, but at the end of the day, we're not all that different. We both want happiness, purpose, connection, and sometimes those things come from surprising places. The businessman nodded, feeling a newfound respect for his companion. Thank you, he said softly, for reminding me of what matters.
The fisherman smiled, and together they watched the sun sink below the horizon, casting the world in a warm, fading light. In that moment, the businessman felt a rare, quiet contentment, a feeling he'd been chasing without even realizing it. He knew he'd leave the village with more than just memories. He'd carry with him the fisherman's words, the wisdom of a simpler life, and the beginning of a friendship that had taught him more than any deal he'd ever closed. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, the businessman knew he'd found something invaluable, a new perspective, a new friend, and perhaps a little closer to the peace he'd been searching for. The next morning, just as dawn began to break, the businessman met the fisherman down at the shore. They'd agreed that he would accompany him for a day of fishing to better understand what he saw in this seemingly simple life. The sky was painted with soft hues of pink and purple, and the ocean was calm, reflecting the colors above. As they pushed the modest wooden boat out onto the water, the businessman felt a sense of peace settle over him, almost as if the ocean itself was inviting him to leave his worries behind. The fisherman rowed with steady, practiced strokes, his movements efficient but unhurried. You see, he said, glancing at the businessman, there's a rhythm to life out here, a balance. The sea, the sky, the wind, they all work together. You can't rush it, you just have to be part of it. The businessman nodded, feeling the boat rock gently with each stroke. He was accustomed to moving through life quickly, but here, the only speed was the unhurried rhythm of the oars. He leaned back, taking a deep breath of the salty air, letting himself relax into the gentle sway of the boat. After a while, they reached a spot that the fisherman favored, where he dropped anchor with the quiet reverence of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. He handed the businessman a fishing line, his hands guiding him to set it up properly. "Patience," the fisherman said with a grin as they cast their lines, "is key. Out here you learn to wait, to listen, to observe." The businessman was used to fast results, to making decisions and seeing immediate outcomes. But as he held the fishing line, feeling the soft pull of the current, he realized this was different. The quiet was both unfamiliar and oddly soothing, a rare break from the endless phone calls and meetings that normally filled his days. He glanced at the fisherman, who sat with an easy, contented smile, his eyes scanning the water. After a few quiet minutes, the businessman couldn't help but break the silence. "Don't you ever get bored, just sitting here waiting?" The fisherman chuckled, shaking his head. "Never. There's always something happening, even if it's subtle. You just have to notice it. Look at the way the water ripples. Listen to the sounds around us. The ocean's alive. It has its own language." As they sat together in the quiet, the businessman started to notice these small details: the call of a distant seabird, the way the sunlight danced on the waves, the gentle lapping of water against the boat's hull. For the first time in a long time, he felt completely present, no longer distracted by worries or to-do lists. After what felt like hours, but might have been just moments, he felt a tug on his line. Surprised, he looked to the fisherman, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Pull it in, but don't rush it," he advised. Following the fisherman's instructions, the businessman carefully reeled in the line, feeling the resistance of the fish. It wasn't the largest catch, but he was struck by a rush of satisfaction, a quiet thrill at the connection between himself and the ocean. As he held up the modest catch, the fisherman grinned and gave him a pat on the back. "See? It's the little things that bring joy out here." The businessman found himself smiling back, feeling a strange but genuine pride. He watched as the fisherman expertly handled his own catch, cleaning the fish with a practiced ease. The simplicity of it all, the process, the small victory, was unexpectedly fulfilling. Once they had enough for a small meal, they stowed their gear and let the boat drift for a while. The sun was higher in the sky now, casting warm light across the water, and the businessman found himself relaxing, lulled by the gentle rise and fall of the waves. They sat together, sharing bread and water the fisherman had packed, and the businessman was struck by the quiet contentment that seemed to radiate from his companion. "You know," he said finally, "I've spent so much of my life chasing, well, more money, more success, more recognition. But I don't think I've ever felt as peaceful as I do right now." The fisherman looked at him thoughtfully. "It's easy to forget that more doesn't always mean better. Sometimes having just enough is, well, enough." He looked out at the horizon, a wistful smile on his face. People chase things, thinking they'll find happiness in them. But happiness isn't out there somewhere, it's right here, in the quiet moments, in being grateful for what you have. The businessman listened, feeling a sense of clarity settle over him. Here, on this simple boat, with no demands or expectations, he understood what the fisherman meant. He'd spent years trying to climb higher, always looking to the next goal. Yet here was a man who had found peace in the simple, everyday rhythms of life. They returned to shore as the sun began its slow descent, the day fading into soft shades of evening. The businessman felt a twinge of regret as they stepped onto the sand, as if he were leaving behind something important. He looked at the fisherman, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for showing me this. I didn't realize how much I needed it." The fisherman smiled warmly. "You're always welcome here. Life isn't about having all the answers. It's about finding the right questions. You don't have to know where you're going. Sometimes just being here is enough." As the businessman walked back toward his hotel, he glanced back at the fisherman, who was already preparing his boat for the next day. He realized that he'd been given a gift more valuable than any business deal or promotion. The lesson wasn't in the catch, but in the process, the peaceful acceptance of life's flow. and as he made his way back to his usual world, he knew he'd carry a piece of that day with him, a reminder that peace wasn't something to be chased, but something to be found, waiting patiently in the quiet corners of life. As the sun continued to rise, casting warm golden hues over the ocean, the businessman found himself lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the fisherman, who was moving with an unhurried grace. Every action, from casting the net to adjusting the boat's rudder, seemed deliberate yet effortless. The fisherman operated in perfect harmony with his surroundings, adapting naturally to the rhythm of the water and wind. The businessman, however, was feeling strangely out of place. His mind, typically buzzing with meetings, emails, and quarterly targets, struggled to embrace the stillness that surrounded him. He couldn't help but wonder, was this how it felt to live a truly peaceful life? The fisherman noticed his guest's silence and gave him an easy smile. "Not used to so much quiet, are you?" The businessman chuckled, a bit self-conscious. "Honestly, no. I'm used to moving fast, always pushing for the next thing. Out here, everything seems slower." "It is slower," the fisherman said, nodding, "but it's steady, reliable. I don't need to rush because the sea doesn't rush. It gives what it has when the time is right." These words stirred something in the businessman. He realized how much of his life had been dedicated to chasing, achieving, and amassing more. His mind drifted back to the long hours, the missed family gatherings, the birthdays and anniversaries he'd promised he'd make up for one day. His success had come at a price he rarely allowed himself to question. "If you don't mind me asking," the businessman began slowly, "have you ever thought about doing more? Expanding, maybe? Reaching beyond this?" He gestured to the boat and the simple tools. The fisherman shrugged, his expression serene. "I've thought about it, sure. People in town sometimes tell me the same thing about how I could get a bigger boat, hire people, maybe even start a fishing business. But I know I wouldn't be happy. That's not what I want." The businessman couldn't hide his surprise. "But you'd have more money? More security? Isn't that worth something?" The fisherman smiled patiently, as if explaining something to a child. "Security is good, yes, but I have enough. And sometimes, chasing after more makes you lose sight of what's right in front of you." The businessman's thoughts turned inward. For years, he had operated under the belief that success was defined by numbers and titles. And yet, sitting here, he felt a pang of envy for this fisherman, a man whose life was simple perhaps, but full. There were no boardrooms, no deadlines or late-night emails, just the steady rhythm of the sea, the sun on his face, and the knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be. They sat in companionable silence, letting the boat drift. After a moment, the fisherman asked, "Do you love what you do?" The question caught the businessman off guard. He was used to questions about goals and growth, but love? That felt personal. He opened his mouth, then paused, searching for an honest answer. "I suppose I do, in a way. I enjoy the challenge, the competition, but it can be exhausting, always striving for more." The fisherman nodded knowingly. "Maybe it's not about how much you achieve, but about what you enjoy along the way. This life, it's not glamorous, but I wake up every day looking forward to the sea, to the quiet, to the peace it gives me. I wouldn't trade that for anything." For a moment, the businessman felt almost envious of this simple, unwavering contentment. He tried to remember the last time he had felt that way, truly at peace, grateful for a moment just as it was. His career had brought him wealth, certainly, but it had also filled his life with deadlines, pressures, and a nagging sense that there was always something just out of reach. "What about ambition?" the businessman asked, almost challenging. "Don't you ever want to do something big, to make a mark?" The fisherman chuckled softly. "Is ambition the same as happiness? I think we confuse those things sometimes. My ambition is to be content, to have enough. Some people chase things their whole lives, always wanting more, always thinking the next thing will bring happiness. But when they finally get it, they find that happiness is still just a little further out." these words echoed in the businessman's mind. He realized that, in many ways, he had spent his life chasing the idea of happiness, convinced it was just one more promotion, one more acquisition, one more success away. But what if happiness wasn't a destination, but a choice? A way of looking at the world that didn't rely on constantly reaching for the next thing? The fisherman stretched his arms and leaned back, looking as comfortable and free as a man could be. I think life is like fishing. You can spend all day casting your line, trying to catch something big, something rare. But sometimes the best catch is the one you already have.
As the sun continued its climb, the businessman felt the weight of his own ambitions in a new light. For years, he had operated with a singular focus: accumulate wealth, power, prestige. But sitting here, he saw how his own success had become a cage, a relentless pursuit that rarely allowed him to stop and enjoy the life he was working so hard to build. The fisherman cast his line one more time, and as he waited for a bite, he said, "Sometimes, less is more. People talk about having everything, but you can't hold everything. You can only hold what fits in your hands. The rest slips away." The simplicity of these words struck a chord deep within the businessman. He realized that he had been so focused on holding onto everything that he had lost sight of what truly mattered: moments of peace, connections with loved ones, and the freedom to simply be. As the day wore on, he found himself wondering if perhaps he had been looking at success all wrong. Maybe the true measure of a fulfilling life wasn't in how much one amassed, but in how deeply one cherished what they already had.
As the day drew to a close, the businessman and the fisherman sat side by side in the boat, surrounded by the calming waves and the brilliant hues of the setting sun. A comfortable silence settled between them, each man lost in his own thoughts. They had spent hours exchanging stories and viewpoints, their lives so vastly different yet unexpectedly connected by shared experiences and simple truths. The businessman looked out at the horizon, feeling a strange mix of peace and confusion. "You know," he began, breaking the quiet, "I think I've spent my whole life believing that happiness was something to be chased, something that could only be found if I just worked hard enough. But seeing how you live, so present, so content, it's made me question everything I thought I knew." The fisherman listened, nodding thoughtfully. Sometimes we're taught to chase things because that's what the world expects of us. But what we need isn't always what the world thinks we do. He smiled. For me, happiness is simple. It's being on this boat, feeling the sun, listening to the waves, and knowing that I've given my best for the day. It's enough. The businessman took a deep breath, his mind racing through memories of endless board meetings, presentations, and sleepless nights spent working toward goals that, in the end, felt less and less fulfilling. He was proud of his achievements, certainly, but he wondered if his sacrifices had brought him as much joy as he'd once imagined they would. Maybe happiness is different for everyone, he mused aloud. For years, I thought the only way to feel truly satisfied was through success and financial security. I pushed myself to achieve more, thinking that one day it would all be worth it. He paused, glancing at the fisherman. But now, I see that you found happiness without any of that. The fisherman chuckled. It's true, I don't have a lot, but I have what I need, and I feel grateful for it. I think happiness isn't about the things you have. It's about what you appreciate in your life. Whether it's family, freedom, or just a quiet moment like this one. The businessman looked down, pondering this. He had always defined his self-worth by his achievements and possessions, yet here was a man who had none of that, and was perfectly at peace. It was a revelation, a reminder that joy could be found in simplicity. After a moment he said, I used to think that the more I achieved, the happier I'd be. But now, I'm not so sure. Maybe I've been carrying around expectations that weren't really mine all along. The fisherman gave him a gentle, understanding look. That happens. We all inherit ideas from others about success, happiness, what our lives should look like. But sometimes we have to let those expectations go, like setting a fish back into the water. They might not belong to us. As they sat there, the businessman felt a sense of relief wash over him. For so long, he had been driven by ambition and the desire for more, convinced that these were the paths to happiness. But maybe, he realized, happiness didn't have to be complicated. Maybe it was simply about finding peace within himself, accepting the life he had chosen, and allowing himself to slow down enough to enjoy it. "You know, this is probably the longest I've gone without checking my phone," he admitted, laughing a little. "I've been so focused on what's next that I forgot to enjoy the now." The fisherman laughed too, casting his line once more. "I've learned that life is like fishing. You can't force the fish to bite or make the waves calm. All you can do is be present, be patient, and enjoy the time you have. The rest will come on its own." Their conversation continued, touching on the businessman's dreams, the fisherman's simple joys, and the lessons they'd learned along the way. Each man found himself reflecting deeply on the other's words, recognizing truths that felt familiar yet profound. It was clear that despite their different paths, both men shared a desire for meaning and a need to feel fulfilled. The businessman felt a sudden urge to share a revelation that had slowly been forming in his mind. "I think I've been scared," he admitted quietly. "Scared that if I stopped moving, stopped pushing, I'd lose my purpose. But watching you today, I see that purpose doesn't have to be about constant progress. Maybe it's about contentment, about feeling grateful for what you have instead of always looking for more." The fisherman nodded, giving his companion an encouraging smile. "It's true. Life is a balance between striving and being. Sometimes we need to push forward, and other times we need to rest. But either way, it's about finding joy in what you do, in whatever moment you're in."
As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow across the water, the businessman felt a rare peace settle over him. The expectations, the pressure to achieve more, it all felt a little lighter now. He wasn't giving up on his dreams, but he realized he didn't need to chase them at the expense of enjoying the journey. Both men understood that their paths were different, and that they each had unique definitions of happiness. But in that shared moment, they had discovered a mutual respect and a bond forged by their willingness to listen and learn from one another. Eventually, they rowed back to shore, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. The businessman knew he would return to his busy life, but he promised himself he'd carry this newfound perspective with him. He'd remember that life was more than achievements. It was about savoring the moments, big and small. As they said their goodbyes, the fisherman clapped him on the shoulder. "Remember, happiness isn't something you find. It's something you create. Take the time to enjoy it." The businessman smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Thank you, my friend. I'll try." And as he walked away, he felt for the first time a quiet contentment, a feeling that perhaps he had finally started to understand what truly mattered.